Hey, what is up guys, it is Harbin Hardware, and in today's video we're gonna build the best Ryzen mini gaming PC featuring this Fantex Evolve RTX case and RTX 3060 Ti graphics card. Now as always, we're gonna go over the whole building process step by step from start to finish, and we're then going to fire up the PC and we're going to look at what kind of frame rate you can expect in case you decide to build this PC. Now if you find anything you like, all items are linked up down below. Now if you're spending about $1,200 on your PC, you should expect a monster, and sure enough with this PC build you'll be able to run most games at 4K with respectable frame rate, and in many games you'll see close to 100 FPS with high level of details at 1440p, which is insane graphics performance at this particular price point. Now inside this PC we find a high clocked Ryzen 5000 processor that trade blows with Intel's TP Top 10900K processor, but at half the price. For RAM we're gonna pair this 6-core beast of a processor with these 16GB DDR4 memory sticks from Corsair, and for the rest of the system we find a 1TB SSD, an RTX 3060 Ti graphics card, all contained in this awesome small form factor mini ITX case from Fantex. Anyway guys, timestamps can be found down below. Now as always, before we get started, be sure to drop a comment, let me know what you thought about the video, drop a like if you enjoyed the content, and make sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. So let's get started with the motherboard coming in at $179, and for today's build I chose the B550i Aorus Pro AX. Now this is a top of the line high quality B550i motherboard that is fully compatible with the all new 5th gen Ryzen and Zen 3 CPUs, and the Pro AX also comes with a BIOS flash button, so in case you have to update your motherboard BIOS you actually don't need a compatible CPU in the socket. All you need is just a USB stick with the latest available BIOS update on it. Now this gigabyte board ticks all the boxes, including 8 phases with 90 amperes, so you could in theory run even the most badass Ryzen processor here without any problems. We also find addressable RGB, support for USB 3.2, we got dual M.2 slots with heat shield, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, Intel Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5, a high-end sound chip, and a total of 5 USB ports. Now for this CPU for today's build I went with AMD's brand new 5th gen and Zen 3 Ryzen 5000 5600X. This blazing fast 6-core and 12-thread CPU is the fastest and best budget gaming processor on the market right now, with performance that beats even Intel's best performing and most expensive processors out there. And if we take a look at some gaming performance super quickly, we see that the 5600X trade blows with both the much more expensive 10-core 10900K, but it even beats Intel's latest 10th gen 10700K in Death Stranding. And in Gears 5, the 10900K actually gets beaten by a few FPS, believe it or not. And even Metro Exodus guys, the $300 5600X is as you can see, dominating the field. The Ryzen 5 5600X has a base clock of 3.7 and 4.6 GHz boost clock. Installing the processor is very easy. Locate the golden triangle, and this lines up with the triangle on a motherboard socket. Simply turn the CPU so that the triangles match up, open the metal arm, drop the processor into the socket, put the metal arm down, and our CPU is installed. Now the cooler I picked for today's build is actually an aftermarket cooler coming from Arctic. This is their 34 Esports Duo. It comes with dual 120mm fans from the Bionics X series lineup, and it will fit perfectly for today's build. This cooler will keep our system cool and quiet, and here's what the system sounds like running Cyberpunk 2077 maxed out with ray tracing set to ultra. The cooler installment is simple. As we can see, our motherboard comes with a retention frame pre-installed, but since we're using a cooler with springs rather than retention clips, we need to remove the retention frame from the board. And with the retention frame removed, ensure that the backplate remains in position with the holes on the motherboard. Then take these 4 standoffs and make sure that all 4 are properly secured to the motherboard. make sure to apply a bit of the included thermal compound on the CPU lid before placing the heatsink over the processor. Also, you wanna remove the pre-installed 120 fans before doing this. After that, we secure the heatsink using the included thumb screws. Using your fingers, tighten them up until you feel resistance. Then you wanna check the CPU coolers to ensure that it's properly secured to the motherboard. Now we're almost done, guys. The only thing missing is our RAMs, and for today's build, I ended up picking these top of the line and super popular 16GB Vengeance Pro RGB RAM sticks from Corsair. Now 16GB is actually more than enough for modern gaming. Now this 3200 MHz kit I chose for this build will give you a bit of a frame rate boost versus using, let's say, a slower clock kit, as the way that the CPU work, having faster clock RAM can gain a bit of performance in your favorite game. And to install this, simply pull back the clips for both DIMM slots and simply plug them in just like so. Super easy, right? And now it is finally time to move our motherboard assembly to our chassis. And for today's build, we're gonna go with the Fantex Evolve ITX tempered glass model, coming in at $80. Now the Evolve ITX is a budget-oriented chassis that uses a metal exterior complemented with a tempered glass side panel. The case comes with a unique bracket solution for mounting a radiator in the top, and for cooling we got a 140mm fan that comes pre-installed, which may seem a bit low, but after 1 hour of driving around in Cyberpunk at 1080p ultra settings with ray tracing turned up to max, I'm actually averaging between 66 to 67C on the CPU and about 62 to 63C on the GPU, which are perfectly fine numbers. Now the Evolve ITX doesn't actually include any RGB, but there is an integrated system already in place, so you can plug in a set of RGB strips if you want. And we're gonna look into this in just a second. Usually, if you've never built a mini PC case before, you're quickly going to realize how much you actually miss building in a bigger case because of the nature of the small form factor. There is not a whole lot of space here, guys. And a lot of times, because it's so tight and narrow, especially during the cable management phase, you might as well for a moment regret choosing this small form factor. But trust me guys, it is all worth it in the end. Anyway, let's install a motherboard, and to get access to the inside of our chassis, all we need to do is untie these 4 thumb screws and take off the tempered glass side panel. And by having the CPU heatsink already installed, we can simply just grab onto the processor cooler and gently slide the motherboard into place. We're gonna use the motherboard screws that comes with our Fantex case, and with the motherboard installed and secured before we install our power supply, graphics card and storage, this is a good time to install our chassis cables that takes care of the front audio, USB as well as the power button. So let's start with USB 3, this is a white connector and it's located right next to the DIMM slots. Unplug it in just like so. Next up we got front audio. This connector is located at the left side corner. Lastly we got front panel connectors, and this can be a bit tricky, but don't sweat it, just take your time here. You find this connector right next to the USB connector right next to the DIMM slots. For our power supply, I picked up the Corsair CX650M. This is 650 watt, coming in at $84. Now this is a high quality power supply that has 80+ bronze efficiency certifications and semi-modular cables for easy cable management. Now I've used this particular model in several of my PC builds in the past, and the CXM series never fails to disappoint. With top of the line performance, low noise and quality components ensure that your PC parts will run safe even if you decide to, let's say, overclock your CPU or graphics card later down the road. As we're installing this, you want to make sure that you got the fan facing downwards, then you gently slide it into place and secure it. Now before we do that, we're gonna need to connect these 2 additional cables to the power supply. First one is the PCIe connector, and this is for our graphics card, and the second one is the SATA power for storage and for the RGB. Simply take each cable and plug it in onto the back of our power supply. Now it is time to plug in some of these to our motherboard. First up we got the 24-pin power connector for the motherboard. Next up we got the 8-pin power for our CPU, and this one goes all the way up to the top left side corner. Now this cable can be a bit tricky because of the limited space, and I recommend removing the 140 fan here to give yourself a bit more space. And after we put back the 140mm fan, you wanna take the dual 120mm PWM operated CPU fans and plug them into the CPU fan header on the motherboard, and then we install them on the heatsink just like so. Now it is time for SSD guys, and once again for today's build we're gonna go with the Kingston A400 with 960GB of storage, and while this isn't the fastest SSD out there, it offers a great mix between price and performance. A mechanical hard drive is also an option, however, while this gives you more storage per dollar, your system will also feel a lot slower and less snappy versus a flash-based solid-state drive. Now 960GB SSD is enough for a few games, and you can always upgrade to more storage later down the road, as the case and motherboard has room for additional SSDs and M.2 sticks. Now in order to install our SSD, we're gonna use one of these two hard drive brackets where up to 2 SSDs or hard drives can be installed. And we're gonna need 4 small screws, which comes from Fantex. Now plug in the SATA cable that comes with our Gigabyte motherboard, as well as this SATA power connector coming from our power supply. Route the SATA cable through one of the various routing holes and plug it into the motherboard. The moment you guys have been waiting for, it is time to install a graphics card, and for today's build I picked up the GeForce RTX 3060 Ti. This is Nvidia's latest $400 GPU designed to replace the RTX 2060 Super, and compared to the RTX 2060 Super, the 3060 Ti is without a doubt a substantial upgrade, as we're going to find out in just a second. Now like the 2060 Super, the 3060 Ti comes with 8GB of DDR6 memory clocked at 7000 MHz for a 14 gigabits per second transfer speed. The 256-bit wide bus results in a peak bandwidth of 448 GB per second. Now in order to install our graphics card, we need to take out these two PCIe slots, and then we can gently install our graphics card. Just like so. Plug in this PCIe cable and our graphics card is now installed. And to spice things up a bit, I actually ended up picking up this Fantex RGB LED strip combo set, which includes two 40mm LEDs, and these can be addressed either by the bottom of the front of the case or by the motherboard. That's entirely up to you. And with these LED strips installed, I like to spend a few extra minutes here on cable management before I whack on the side panel. You want to make sure that there is no cable blocking or preventing air blowing off the CPU or GPU. And this is important to make sure our components always performs at its intended performance to prevent potential throttling, which otherwise can be a common problem in a smaller form factor PC enclosure. Whack on the side panels, and it is time to turn on our system, and hopefully guys, if you did everything right, it should power on. Now the very first time you boot up your system, you want to double check that your RAM sticks are running in its so-called XMP profile, and to do so upon startup you want to tap delete while you're seeing the Aorus Gigabyte logo. Now once inside, navigate to XMP on the left hand side and you want to activate it. That will automatically load the XMP settings for RAM sticks so that they can run in their advertised speed. You want to save all the changes and you're good to go. So starting at 1080p at high settings, I noticed that the RTX 3060 Ti performs very similar to last generation RTX 2080 Super. Now the RTX 3060 Ti is only about 15% slower than the $499 brother RTX 3070 on average. Now keep in mind, 1080p gaming isn't going to put too much strain on the GPU as let's say 4K or 1440p. And speaking of which, if we jump over to 1440p, which is really what the card is marketed at, we quickly see that the 3060 Ti runs very well at this resolution, even with lots of graphics detail. And we're averaging over 60 FPS in every title tested. If we take a look at Godfall for example, the 3060 Ti is not a whole lot slower than the RTX 3070. And looking at the 2060 Super, we see that the 3060 is actually 48% faster. In Watch Dogs Legion, the 3060 Ti does not disappoint either, where it outperforms the last generation 5700 XT by a whopping 30%, and the 3060 Ti also performs very well in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, as can be seen, running just about 9% slower versus the 3070. Last but definitely not least, if we take a look at 4K resolution, we see that the RTX 3060 Ti continues to show good form, and it actually performs very good in 4K resolution as well. However, this resolution is not recommended in all situations, as the frame rate can get close to 30 FPS in some titles, as can be seen. However, keep in mind guys, we're running the games here in ultra settings, and so you can always dial back on the settings a bit to reach a satisfying frame rate. Now, all PC components we just went over can be found down below. Now, I am starting up a Discord server guys, and it would be fantastic if you guys wanted to join the awesome community and start discussing PC builds and issues and everything in between. So I'm going to hang out there and answer you guys' questions, and it would feel awesome if you guys wanted to join. Now watch either of these two videos, and I will see you guys in the next video.